We live under the curious illusion that one day we will arrive, that if only we can gather enough achievements, enough wealth, enough recognition, then at last we will be whole, complete, satisfied. And so we run, we strive, we grasp, forever chasing a horizon that keeps moving just beyond our reach. But the horizon, you see, was never meant to be caught. The more you run toward it, the more it recedes. And the tragedy is not that we fail to reach it, but that we never pause to notice the ground beneath our feet, the sky above our head, the present moment in which life actually happens. Success, in the way most of us imagine it, is a mirage. When you grasp it, it dissolves, and the thirst remains. Yet beyond this endless chase lies a deeper truth. You are not incomplete. You are not waiting to be finished by accomplishments. You are already the whole process of life unfolding. What you seek in success is not the thing itself, but the feeling you imagine it will bring. And that feeling has been here all along, waiting quietly beneath the noise of striving. To discover this is to awaken. It is to see that what completes you is not out there in the world of trophies and titles, but here in the living moment, in the simple miracle of being. From the moment we are born, society begins whispering into our ears a simple, seductive story that life is a ladder, that success is something to be reached, acquired, and accumulated, that one day, when we have enough of it, we will finally be complete. We are told to chase grades, promotions, wealth, titles, prestige, relationships, and recognition, as though these external tokens could fill the vast emptiness inside. The mind believes this story with fervent sincerity, and the heart latches onto it with desperate hope, imagining that somewhere out there exists the elusive point at which all striving will finally cease and satisfaction will settle in as a permanent resident. Yet, when we examine closely the lives of those who have achieved what the world calls success, we see a paradox. The moment of triumph is fleeting, and the sense of wholeness it promises is often absent. Even after the accumulation of riches, accolades, and recognition, the restlessness remains. The feeling of incompletion does not vanish, and the mind begins whispering again, urging more striving, more chasing, more doing, because what was sought externally cannot satisfy internally. The chase of success is like running after a mirage in a desert, believing that with each step the oasis will come closer, only to discover that it shifts further away as we approach. Human beings are incredibly adept at imagining that the next acquisition, the next promotion, the next achievement will finally fill the void, yet this is an illusion, because the void was never empty to begin with. It has always been full of life, full of consciousness, full of being itself. We mistake the mirage for reality, not realizing that we are mistaking the content of experience for the capacity to experience. Success in the conventional sense offers objects, positions, or status, but what we are truly seeking is the feeling of completeness, the sense that we are enough just as we are. And yet, because we have been trained to look outward for validation, we continue to chase things that cannot, by their very nature, satisfy the longing inside. Consider how we measure success from the perspective of society. We are told that a successful person has a high-paying job, drives a luxury car, lives in a beautiful house, has a visible status symbol, and is praised by peers. Yet behind these symbols often lies anxiety, fear, and dissatisfaction. The more we achieve, the more we notice gaps we imagine were filled, the more we crave what we do not have. The mind becomes a hungry ghost, always chasing, never resting, and in this relentless pursuit, we often fail to notice the beauty, the love, and the fulfillment that are already present in the ordinary moments of life. This is the tragic irony of human striving. We believe that fulfillment lies ahead, yet it has always been beneath our very noses, hidden only because we are too busy looking elsewhere. We can also look at the lives of famous achievers, people who have reached the pinnacle of wealth, power, and recognition. Many of them speak, often with regret, about the emptiness that followed their apparent success. The house, the car, the accolades. They provided temporary pleasure, a fleeting sense of achievement. But they did not provide the sense of completion promised. Some even speak of anxiety, depression, and despair, realizing that what they had been chasing was a mirage. The story of external success deceives the mind into believing that it can buy or create something that is already inherent in the act of living. This is why the chase never truly ends, because it was never about the object. It was always about the experience, the wholeness, and the being that we mistakenly believed was somewhere else. The craving for success arises from the mistaken belief that the self is separate, incomplete, and lacking. The ego convinces us that in order to become, we must acquire, achieve, and accumulate. Every promotion, every recognition, every possession is imagined as a stepping stone toward completion, as if the self is a vessel that must be filled with external markers in order to be whole. Yet, upon closer inspection, the self is not a vessel to be filled, but a river already flowing. It is not a fragment waiting to be completed, but a whole existing in every moment. The pursuit of success is often driven by this fundamental misunderstanding, the belief that we are outside of life, and that life must deliver something to us in order for us to be at peace. This is a profound misperception, because life is not a set of rewards to be collected, but an unfolding process in which we are already participants, already complete in our own experience, already whole in the very act of being. Even the mind itself conspires to keep us in this chase. Thoughts whisper constantly, comparing, measuring, and evaluating. If only I had this, then I would be happy. If only I achieved that, then I would feel complete. These thoughts generate a sense of lack, convincing the ego that it must strive endlessly. But the very act of striving from a place of lack reinforces the sense of incompleteness. The paradox is clear: the more we chase to become complete, the more incomplete we feel. In other words, the pursuit of success for the sake of completion is a trap, a cycle without end, because the thing we are seeking cannot exist outside the present moment. Wholeness is not something to be earned, achieved, or acquired. It is realized, recognized, and awakened within the immediacy of now. To break free from this cycle requires a shift in perspective. It requires understanding that fulfillment does not reside in external markers of success, that the feeling of being complete cannot be bought, won, or attained by outdoing others. Instead, it lies in the recognition of the already present wholeness of life, in the conscious awareness that we are already enough, that the self is already complete, and that the pursuit of success is not a ladder to fulfillment, but an endless treadmill leading nowhere. This shift is not a denial of ambition, not a refusal to strive, but a reorientation from seeking completion in things to experiencing completion in being. The river flows regardless of whether we try to dam it, the sun rises regardless of whether we chase it, and the present moment contains the fullness of life regardless of whether we grasp for it or not. Consider the metaphor of the musician who plays not to impress the audience, but to immerse fully in the act of playing. The joy, the fulfillment, the wholeness arise in the moment of engagement, not in the applause that comes afterward. The applause, the recognition, the reward may or may not come, and if it does, it is fleeting. Yet the act itself contains completeness. Similarly, success in the conventional sense is often external applause, but it is the immersion in life, in the present, in the activity of being that provides true satisfaction. When we chase after markers of success as if they could complete us, we overlook the intrinsic joy of engagement, the natural fulfillment that arises when we participate fully in the flow of life. Another important dimension to consider is the impermanence of external success. Wealth can vanish, recognition fades, achievements become memories, and titles lose their luster. The very things we imagine will complete us are fleeting and subject to forces beyond our control. To rely on them for wholeness is to build on sand, to stake the self on something that is fundamentally transient. Awareness of this impermanence can be liberating, because it points to the need to find stability and completeness not in what comes and goes, but in the underlying awareness that witnesses coming and going. This awareness, this fundamental consciousness, is unchanging not because it controls life, but because it simply is. It is the ground upon which the ever-changing world unfolds, the silent presence in which all achievements and losses appear, even relationships and social validation, which are often included in the notion of success, cannot bring permanent fulfillment. Approval from others can be gratifying in the short term, but it is conditional, fluctuating, and ultimately external. True satisfaction comes not from being approved of, but from being aligned with the intrinsic sense of self that is already whole. When we attach our sense of completion to external affirmation, we surrender the very wholeness we seek to things outside ourselves. Only by recognizing that the self is not incomplete, that it is not dependent on external events, can a person experience freedom and contentment. The paradox of human life is that the very things we chase to fill the emptiness cannot do so, yet the emptiness was never empty to begin with. It was always full of life, consciousness, and presence. The relentless chase of success can also blind us to beauty, wonder, and joy in the ordinary moments of life. When the mind is constantly occupied with what must be achieved next, it fails to notice the miracle of a sunrise, the laughter of a friend, the warmth of a quiet afternoon. Life passes by, and we are so preoccupied with the idea that completion is somewhere ahead that we forget the richness of the present. Success becomes a filter, distorting reality, reducing the world to a series of objectives to be met rather than experiences to be lived. In contrast, when the mind pauses and recognizes the completeness of the present, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and fulfillment is discovered in the smallest acts of being. Ultimately, the endless chase of success is a story that the mind tells to keep the ego occupied, to distract from the simple truth that we are already whole, already complete, and already enough. This story convinces us to seek outside ourselves, to measure worth by external accomplishments, and to equate life with accumulation. The moment we awaken from this story, we see that success is not a destination, and completion is not something to be obtained. They are illusions designed to keep the mind busy and the heart yearning. What truly completes us is not found in accolades or possessions, but in the direct experience of life itself, in the conscious recognition of presence, in the awareness that the self is already whole, complete, and infinitely sufficient. The illusion of completion is perhaps one of the most subtle and pervasive deceptions that the human mind constructs. From childhood, we are taught that we are incomplete, that we are fragments scattered in need of collection, and that only by acquiring the right objects, the right education, the right relationships, or the right status can we ever hope to be whole. The ego whispers incessantly that something is missing, that a gap exists within us, and that the measure of our lives will be determined by how well we fill that gap. Every advertisement, every societal expectation, every cultural narrative reinforces this sense of lack, convincing the mind that there is always a step forward, a rung higher, a thing beyond our current grasp that must be obtained. Yet the paradox is striking, because the very act of believing in incompleteness ensures a life of perpetual seeking, a life in which fulfillment always seems just out of reach, always suspended like a carrot on a stick before the eyes of a restless donkey. The ego's construction of incompleteness is subtle. Disguised as ambition, drive, or prudence, it convinces us that to rest is to fail, that to pause is to fall behind, that to be satisfied is to become stagnant. In this way, the ego transforms the natural process of growth into a trap of endless striving. We pursue careers, wealth, possessions, and recognition, imagining that each acquisition will finally fill the internal void, yet every success only exposes new desires, new gaps, and new perceived deficiencies. It is as if the self is a sponge forever placed under a faucet, never satisfied with what has been absorbed, always seeking more liquid to soak into its pores. The illusion is maintained so effectively that even those who have amassed wealth, influence, or fame often awaken in the quiet hours to a profound sense of emptiness, wondering why the pinnacle of success has failed to provide the wholeness they imagined it would. Part of this illusion arises from a misunderstanding of the nature of self. Most people assume that the self is a fixed, isolated entity, a separate vessel with missing parts waiting to be filled by external achievements or experiences. The ego insists that completion is something to be obtained, that wholeness is not innate, but contingent on circumstances outside of our control. Yet the self is not a container to be filled, nor is it a fragment in need of repair. It is a process, a dynamic flow, an ever-present awareness that does not require anything outside itself to be complete. The sense of lack is not a factual deficit, but a mental construction, a story told to keep the mind preoccupied, to justify incessant activity, and to maintain the illusion of progression. This misunderstanding of self and completion manifests in countless ways in daily life. People measure themselves against others, comparing accomplishments, possessions, relationships, and social standing. Every comparison reinforces the notion that they are less than, behind, or insufficient, and the mind jumps from one measure to another, attempting to fill the perceived gap. Success is then pursued as a salve for inadequacy, but the pursuit is circular, because the very act of seeking from the perspective of lack strengthens the sense of incompletion. Even when the goals are achieved, the mind searches for the next objective, for the next sign that it has arrived, for the next affirmation that completion is near. This cycle, repeated endlessly, traps the individual in a loop of chasing illusions, never pausing to notice that the state of wholeness they seek is already present in the simple fact of being alive. One of the greatest challenges of understanding the illusion of completion is that it feels real. The mind can produce desires, fears, and feelings of inadequacy so convincingly that they are experienced as truth. When we feel incomplete, we believe it. When we strive for more, we feel compelled to do so. Yet this feeling is not a reflection of reality, but of conditioned perception, shaped by culture, upbringing, and the ego's persistent narratives. The realization that completeness is inherent, that the self is already whole, is not obvious, because it contradicts the lifetime of conditioning that has taught us otherwise. This is why awakening to wholeness is often described as paradoxical, a moment in which the mind recognized that what it was seeking externally was never absent internally, and that the quest itself was an unnecessary journey, beautiful in its unfolding, but ultimately misdirected. The illusion of completion also interacts with time in a unique way. The ego always projects fulfillment into the future, promising that one day, when certain conditions are met, satisfaction will arrive. Yet the future is an abstraction, a mental construct that exists only in anticipation and imagination. When the mind lives perpetually in the future, it misses the actuality of the present moment, the only moment in which life is truly experienced. Completion, therefore, is not a destination to be reached at some later point, but a recognition of the fullness of the now. It is realized in the simple observation of experience, in the conscious awareness that the self is not something separate or lacking, but already a living process, already participating in the totality of existence. To chase completion in the future is to chase an illusion, a mirage that vanishes as soon as it is approached. Even within relationships, the illusion manifests powerfully. Many people seek love, companionship, and approval as if these external sources could complete them. They imagine that a partner, friend, or mentor will provide what is missing, and yet when such connections are formed, they often fail to deliver the promised sense of wholeness. The heart discovers that no other person can give what can only be recognized within oneself. Completion is not granted by another, nor is it contingent upon mutual approval or external validation. It is the awareness of presence and the acceptance of being that dissolves the sense of incompleteness. Relationships flourish not because they fill gaps, but because they reflect the already existing wholeness in each participant, allowing love and connection to emerge naturally rather than as a remedy for deficiency. Another aspect of the illusion is the attachment to identity constructed by success. People imagine that they will be complete once they become a certain version of themselves. Professional, a parent, a leader, a creative genius. Yet these identities are fluid, impermanent, and often beyond our control. The self is not fixed in the roles we play or the titles we acquire. The pursuit of these identities as a path to completion can lead to constant self-scrutiny, comparison, and dissatisfaction, because the ego measures itself against ideals and expectations rather than recognizing the inherent value and completeness of the self as it exists. True completion is realized not through the accumulation of roles, titles, or possessions, but through the recognition that life itself is the self, and that participation in the unfolding of being is inherently whole. Even when reflection, meditation, or spiritual practice is undertaken, the mind can create subtler forms of the illusion. One may imagine that enlightenment, inner peace, or awakening is something to be achieved in the future, a state to arrive at, a completeness to be earned. Yet, even in these practices, the recognition of wholeness cannot be postponed. It arises when the mind sees through the illusion, when the search is released, when the self recognizes itself in the present moment. The paradox is simple yet profound. The very pursuit of wholeness, as if it is absent, delays the recognition of the wholeness that is always present. To awaken to this truth is to realize that completeness is not a prize at the end of the journey, but the very ground upon which the journey unfolds. Society, of course, rarely emphasizes this perspective. Culture, media, and education are largely built on narratives of deficiency and completion through acquisition. We are taught to chase, to compete, to accumulate, and to measure ourselves against arbitrary standards. Yet when one glimpses the underlying reality, it becomes clear that these standards are not measures of wholeness but of conformity, and that the chase they inspire is a distraction from the recognition of intrinsic completeness. To step outside this societal narrative requires courage, awareness, and a willingness to question the most deeply held assumptions about self-worth and life itself. It requires the recognition that what we have been seeking was never outside, but always within, in the immediacy of experience and in the simple act of being alive. Ultimately, the illusion of completion is a powerful teacher. It drives human striving, creativity, and achievement, yet it also shows the limitations of external measures as a path to fulfillment. By observing this illusion without judgment, by recognizing it as a construct of the mind, one begins to loosen the grip of seeking, to rest in the awareness that the self is whole, and to live fully in the present. The paradox is complete in itself. The illusion of incompletion exists to guide the mind toward the realization that nothing external can complete us, and that the self, life, and consciousness are already eternally sufficient. The present as wholeness is a truth that is both simple and profoundly difficult for the mind to grasp. From our earliest days, we are conditioned to live in the future, to measure life in terms of what will come next, to constantly imagine that fulfillment lies over the horizon in a world beyond the present moment. The mind becomes a perpetual clock ticking forward, projecting desires, fears, and plans into a time that does not yet exist, while the only reality, the living present, slips by unnoticed. And yet, it is precisely in this present moment that life unfolds, that consciousness awakens, that being is complete. To recognize this is to glimpse a reality that is often counterintuitive to the ego, which insists that wholeness must be obtained through accumulation, achievement, and striving, but the present contains a completeness that is intrinsic and unchanging, regardless of circumstance, regardless of acquisition, and regardless of recognition. When one begins to notice the present as wholeness, a subtle shift occurs. Attention moves away from the endless checklist of goals and desires, from the imagined future where fulfillment supposedly resides, to the immediacy of experience itself. Each breath, each heartbeat, each sensation becomes a portal to recognition. The mind, accustomed to projecting into the future, begins to pause, to rest in the simple act of being. There is a quiet liberation in this, a freedom from the tyranny of time, because the present does not demand anything, it does not judge, and it does not require that we become something we are not. It simply is, and in its being is a wholeness that the mind has been seeking in all the wrong places. The ego, of course, resists this awareness. It whispers, "You are incomplete, you need more, you must achieve, you must arrive." It frames the present as insufficient, as a temporary pause between moments of striving, and it convinces the self that contentment is elsewhere. Yet the present moment is never temporary, never insufficient. It is the only place in which life can be experienced. To experience the present fully is to recognize that the self is already complete, that the river of consciousness flows without interruption. That existence is not a puzzle to be solved or a gap to be filled, but a continuous unfolding that is already whole. The challenge is not external, it is the willingness to let the mind rest, to release its insistence on moving beyond, and to awaken to the completeness that is right here, right now. In the recognition of the present as wholeness, one begins to see that the search for external markers of success, approval, and fulfillment is unnecessary. The ego, driven by the belief in incompleteness, interprets external events as crucial to survival and validation, and it constructs narratives that tether happiness to circumstance. But in the presence of awareness, in the direct experience of now, these narratives dissolve. The sun rises and sets, the seasons turn, the breath flows, and in observing these simple phenomena, a recognition emerges. Life itself is sufficient. Wholeness is not a product of accomplishment, possession, or recognition. It is the background of experience, the constant presence that witnesses all appearances without being altered by them. To see this is to discover a freedom that is unshakable, a satisfaction that does not depend on circumstance, and a joy that is always available when the mind stops resisting what is. The present as wholeness also illuminates the nature of desire. Most desires are rooted in a sense of lack, in the imagined gap that must be closed in order to be complete. Yet when attention rests fully in the present, desires are transformed. They are no longer driven by anxiety or deficiency, but arise naturally from engagement with life. A person can act, create, achieve, and love without clinging to the outcome as a measure of completion. The present moment provides a canvas for action, and action is most vibrant when it flows from awareness rather than from desperation. To act from presence is to act in wholeness, and to act from wholeness is to participate in life without being consumed by it. Even suffering and difficulty are seen differently in the recognition of the present as wholeness. Pain, loss, and challenge are not eliminated, but the relationship to them changes. Instead of seeing hardship as a threat to completeness, one begins to perceive it as part of the unfolding of life, as an element within the river of experience that does not diminish the self. The ego struggles against adversity, imagining that survival and success are contingent upon external conditions, but in the present, one sees that wholeness is not dependent on ease or comfort. The breath continues, the mind observes, and awareness remains intact, untouched by circumstance. In this understanding, the present moment contains a sanctuary, a grounding, a wholeness that cannot be taken away by the vicissitudes of life. The present also reframes the concept of accomplishment. When the mind is fully aware of now, achievement is no longer a means to fill a void, but an expression of wholeness already present. Success is no longer a pursuit for the sake of validation or completion, but a natural unfolding of engagement with life. Every task, every creative act, every relationship becomes infused with meaning, not because it achieves something externally, but because it is embraced in its entirety as it exists. This is the paradox of life. Completion is not in the end, but in the process, and the present moment is the vessel in which this truth is realized. The recognition of the present as wholeness also shifts the relationship with time itself. Instead of living in anxiety about the future or regret about the past, awareness anchors one in the now, seeing both the past and the future as constructs that exist only in the mind. Memory and imagination serve their purposes, but they are not the source of fulfillment. Fulfillment arises from the direct experience of being, the continuous flowing reality that exists independent of narrative. The past becomes a lesson, the future a possibility, and the present the only true ground for life. In resting in the present, one discovers that completion has always been here, waiting for the mind to release its compulsive chasing. Even in the ordinary moments, the present as wholeness reveals profound depth. Washing dishes, walking in the park, listening to a friend, feeling the wind on the skin. These simple acts, when experienced with full attention, are complete in themselves. The mind, trained to chase grand achievements, often overlooks this fact, imagining that fulfillment requires extraordinary circumstances. Yet life in its quiet, ordinary flow contains all that is necessary for recognition of wholeness. Every moment offers an opportunity to awaken to this reality, to see that the self is not fragmented, not lacking, not incomplete, but already a part of the totality of existence, perfectly sufficient and inherently whole. The present moment also dissolves the attachment to outcomes. The ego clings to success, recognition, and validation as if they are the only means to satisfaction, yet in awareness, the attachment loosens. One can pursue goals and dreams, participate fully in the world, and yet not confuse these activities with the source of wholeness. The act of being, the conscious engagement with life as it is itself fulfilling. Success becomes a byproduct, not the measure, and completion is discovered not at the end of effort, but in the moment of presence that encompasses effort itself. The mind begins to see that life is not a problem to be solved, a gap to be filled, or a horizon to be reached, but a flowing process in which every moment contains the fullness of existence. In recognizing the present as wholeness, the self begins to live with a profound sense of freedom. There is no need to chase or grasp, no need to compare or measure, and no need to postpone joy until some imagined point of completion. The moment is sufficient, the experience is sufficient, and the self in its awareness is already whole. This does not negate the desire to grow, learn, or create. Rather, it transforms these desires into expressions of participation in life rather than attempts to patch a perceived deficiency. Growth arises naturally, joy arises naturally, and engagement arises naturally when the mind rests in the recognition that life itself in its unfolding is complete. Ultimately, the present as wholeness is a revelation, a paradox, a liberation. It shows that what we have been seeking externally through success, achievement, and accumulation was never absent internally. The self is not something to be fixed, completed, or attained. It is the awareness in which life unfolds. To rest in this truth is to awaken, to see clearly, and to live freely. Life is sufficient, consciousness is complete, and every moment contains the entirety of being. Fully, already, endlessly living beyond success is not about renouncing achievement or abandoning ambition. It is about recognizing that the worth of life does not depend on external markers, accolades, or accomplishments. From childhood, we are taught to measure our value by what we attain, by how we compare to others, by the visible signs of recognition and approval. Yet these measures are fragile, fleeting, and ultimately incapable of delivering the sense of completeness that we crave. The pursuit of success as a means to validate the self creates a life of constant striving, a treadmill that spins endlessly, and the deeper we run, the more elusive the destination becomes. To live beyond success is to step off this treadmill, not by ceasing to act or engage, but by understanding that the source of fulfillment lies not in the outside world, but in the awareness that underlies all experience. The mind resists this idea because it has been conditioned to seek, to chase, to measure. It believes that completion is somewhere else, that the self is a fragment waiting to be made whole by achievement or acquisition. Yet when we observe carefully, we notice that the mind itself is a construction, a pattern of thoughts, comparisons, and judgments, constantly evaluating and projecting into the future. The sense of incompleteness arises from this mental activity, and the belief that success can fill it is a delusion. External accomplishments are impermanent, contingent, and often outside our control. They can be lost, stolen, or rendered meaningless by changing circumstances. The recognition of this impermanence reveals the fragility of tying the sense of self to external outcomes, and it points to the necessity of discovering a source of completeness that is independent of circumstance. Living beyond success involves a radical reorientation of perspective. It requires seeing that the self is already whole, that fulfillment is not a reward to be earned, and that the present moment contains all that is necessary for wholeness. This is not a passive state, nor is it a rejection of action. Rather, it is a conscious choice to engage with life fully without mistaking accomplishments for the source of satisfaction. In this way, one can act with energy, creativity, and purpose, yet remain unshaken by the results, seeing them as expressions of participation rather than as determinants of worth. Life is then experienced not as a series of milestones to reach, but as a flowing process in which every moment contains completeness. The paradox of living beyond success becomes apparent when one examines desire. Desire is often portrayed as the engine of life, motivating action and shaping achievement. Yet desire rooted in lack creates an endless cycle of striving as the mind perpetually reaches for what it imagines will complete it. When desire is transformed by awareness, it becomes an expression of engagement rather than a symptom of deficiency. A person can pursue goals, create art, build relationships, and contribute to the world, not to fill a perceived gap, but because these activities arise naturally from participation in life. The act itself becomes fulfilling, and completion is realized in the immersion rather than in the external reward. Even pleasure and happiness are understood differently when living beyond success. Most people imagine that happiness is conditional,